Greetings, travellers, and thank you for joining us on our 30th excursion into Innsmouth. I am one of your guides, Tim Mendes.
And I'm the other one, Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining the tour today.
Yeah, I believe we're going to meet some special guests today, is that right?
It certainly is, because as you'll see today, we've brought you straight to the decaying splendour of Innsmouth Picturehouse. And before we start, I just want to thank Eric, the masked organist, for playing us in at the start there. He studied under Fibes, apparently. Yeah, very interesting character. And we've come to the Picture House because today we're having a special chat about Lovecraftian movies. And we're delighted to welcome two guests. We have Jim Rohner and James McCormack from the Cast of Cthulhu podcast. Thanks for coming in, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. We don't get to guest on other people's podcasts very often.
This is the first, actually, right? Together, you know?
That's cool.
I think, yeah. At least as a duo, yeah.
Oh, that's nice. And is this your first visit to Innsmouth?
What would you say, Jim? Yeah, I think it's the first time. I mean, I think we've looked into it, but we've
yeah.
Yeah, it can be hard finding somewhere with good reviews on TripAdvisor.
Yeah, we've dabbled. We've gotten some brochures. We've looked at some Airbnbs, but
yeah, Yelp, the Innsmouth Yelp.
Yeah, we were told that the especially the downtown area had a lot of charm. Not sure what that meant, but
yes. That's one word for it. Yeah.
Oh, it's the charm that will get you every time.
There you go.
Perhaps we can start then by talking about the podcast and how you got into that and what it's all about.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I mean, James and I have been doing film podcasting for a long time. I met him whenever Prometheus came out, because he used to host a podcast or co-host a podcast called the Criterion Collection, which just walks through the catalog of movies in the Criterion Collection, as the name would, or the Criterion Cast, as the name would entail. And just I met up with them him and his host one evening to kind of discuss a movie. We grabbed some drinks. It was a good time. And so I had a film podcast in the past called I Do Movies Badly, in which James was a guest on a couple times. And the Cast of Cthulhu was always something that had occurred to me, at least, first and foremost, because it's a delicious pun, the Cast of Cthulhu, the Call of Cthulhu. And so I knew I wanted to do something with Lovecraft Adaptations specifically, because it's, people kind of touch on it, but it's not one that people regularly dive into. So I'm like, but I know I want to do it by myself I don't want to do it by myself because my past podcast endeavors were just me, and I can't stand the sound of my own voice.
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
But I knew I wanted to do something with a person. And so one day on Twitter, James was just posting I want to do a podcast with someone who's got some ideas. And so I'm like, what do you think of Lovecraft? And so that was kind of it. And the way that we kind of approach it is I'm more of, I guess, a film snob, and James, if there is an obscure exploitative foreign horror film, James has seen it and loved it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because you're talking about where I started with podcasting. The Criterion Cast was a great time. It was just 3 to 4 of us that we just delved into the Criterion Collection. So everyone assumed we were the snobby group of guys, and only one of us was. I won't say, who it was, but I was always known as the guy who liked the Z grade shit. Oh,
yeah, nice.
You like the trash. Yeah, but I also like class, but I really like trash cinema. So that kind of led into other podcasts I had, like Cine Awesome, which was a brief one I had with friends of mine. And then I had a TV movie podcast up until we started, Jim and I started doing the Cast of Cthulhu, where we would talk about TV movies. And I loved doing that podcast. But my co-host went on to actually, found a film company that's been doing really well right now. So I don't fault. Yeah, he founded Yellow Veil Pictures. So anything from Lose to Starfish and all these films that have Starfish, which is a film we've covered. It's funny that he helped, put it out there. So I don't fault him for that. I'm like, yeah, you know what? We weren't getting paid for the podcast. You do your thing. So I did kind of throw it out there on Twitter. I was like, hey, I really want to do another podcast. I don't care what it is. I had ideas of my own, but and like it's like Jim and I were like friends, so he brought up Lovecraft, and I'm like, I knew Lovecraftian films. I knew Lovecraft films like Reanimator and From Beyond, but did not know how many films I actually liked that were or could be considered Lovecraftian. And kind of like, it's great the conversations him and I have, because a lot of times Jim would be like, I don't really like this film. And I'm like, well, I'll find like the good thing about most of the films. We'll talk about one film I think that I actually wrote down that was probably the worst film we've covered, but we'll see that later. But I do try to find like the good in everything in film, but sometimes I can't even save some films. So.
I think we're kind of similar there then, because I like crap. The rubbisher the better. I like nothing better than to crack open a couple of beers and watch a real Z grade piece of trash.
Well, okay, so give me one that you were like, you know what? I know it's not a good film per se, but it's a film that you just enjoy. What
in the sort of Lovecraftian?
Not even Lovecraftian.
Anything.
God,
so I'm a huge fan of Trauma and things like that. So I like Poltergeist.
I worked for Trauma briefly.
Oh wow!
So, Poltergeist.
There you go.
Poltergeist is awesome. I love Poltergeist. Yeah. No, it's funny. I actually briefly interned for Trauma many years ago.
Oh, nice.
Around the same time that Lloyd Kaufman did the video for I forgot what song it was, but Newfound Glory out of all the bands out there. So they did a video for them. But my one takeaway from I love Trauma, and I still do, but working for them was you were a gopher. So I got everyone coffee and stuff, and every time Lloyd Kaufman would come in, he would never get my name right.
That's a faux pas. That's a faux pas.
I don't have a very fancy name. It's James. he would come in. The best name he called me. It's like, hey, Ezekiel, how you doing today?
Ezekiel.
I'm like, oh,
pretty close.
Nice. And yeah, I mean, nice to see you, Mr. Kaufman. No, call me Lloyd, Ezekiel.
I mean, in his defense, James and Ezekiel are both biblical names, so he was in the ballpark of that one.
I was going to say, maybe it's that mighty fine beard you got there, sir.
I didn't know it was a God-fearing man because of his name. You go, ties it all back in.
Meanwhile, when I was graduating college, I interviewed to be an intern at Trauma, and as a pretentious 22-year-old, like, nah, I'm above this place, which is like, and now,
and it still continues. Like, you thought you were above it, I'm like, I'll join. I'm not going to do anything. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'll get coffee and get called Ezekiel.
Please.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, if you are so curious as to one day go on a bender and dig back through our catalog, there's plenty of times when I'm going on a rant about something and why I like it, and James is like, yeah, I get it, but I love it. It's like, well.
And well, each to their own.
Exactly.
Did you get into Lovecraft through the films, or had you read any of the stories before?
Well, James, if you don't mind, I'll start for me at least. It's weird. I was thinking about this the other day because I can't actually remember my first exposure to Lovecraft specifically, which I think speaks to, one, how forgetful I am as a human being, but also just kind of how pervasive his influence is just in pop culture in general. Like, I mean, was I aware of Cthulhu? Yes. Was I aware of where it came from? No. But I knew this idea of this giant squid-faced kind of undersea entity was a thing because it just, you couldn't escape that. And even in like metal, songs, like, Out the Mountains of Madness and that kind of stuff is just kind of pervasive in pop culture and music and comics and everything. So I guess I was aware of it and aware of this name Lovecraft, always assuming it was like a fake name or a pseudonym that someone took on, not actually realizing like, oh, that's an actual human? Okay, that's strange. But I know years ago, when I first started working in New York City, I actually lived in a different state. So I would take a long train commute every morning and every evening to get to and from work. And just I had a lot of time to kill. So I just started reading, and I just kind of picked up some Lovecraft short stories, some collections of them, and just kind of read it and was like, wow, I'm actually really connecting with this guy's writing style, and just kind of, it was flowery, and it was like kind of a little bit, I'd say, needlessly flowery, but I engaged with that somehow. Like, just there's a linguist buried inside. And so I was just, this is really cool. And then eventually when I discovered podcasts, one of the first ones I started listening to was one from the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society with Chad Pfeiffer and Chris Lackey. Falling in love with Andrew Lehman's voice when he like would read the stories and that kind of stuff. And so I really kind of got into it. And then, years ago, I guess my first Lovecraft film was after a late night party at my parents' house, and was talking to a friend the next morning. He's like, have you ever seen this movie Reanimator? You got to check it out. And then I won't get into too many details. It was one of our first episodes. I don't care for it as a Lovecraft adaptation, but it's one of my hottest of hot takes, I suppose, on the show. But it's funny, as I was thinking about this episode, I was like, I can't really say I'm into weird fiction that much. I mean, outside of Lovecraft, really one of the only things I've read was Arthur Machen's The Great God Pan. But haven't really read any other. I've have Lynn Carter's like the Zothic legend cycle on my bookshelf for years. Have I cracked it open? No. It's really like it's just kind of it's Lovecraft for me, and I just haven't had really the time or the bandwidth to kind of explore, which is maybe a crime because I know how influential he has been to other writers and other authors and just kind of other artists in general.
Yeah.
Well, then I'm glad you actually said other authors, because the way I got into Lovecraft just by chance was, as a young kid, I was obsessed with Stephen King, and like I just would devour everything. Like I was so happy when, like, it's funny to look back, like The Stand was coming out, the miniseries. So I was like, they put out the 1,600-page edition of The Stand. and
all the extended version,
and I'm like, and I read it like, oh, Trash Can Man. I was obsessed with it, and then through that, I found his nonfiction book, Dance Macabre, and he discusses Lovecraft and what's scary and all this other stuff in it, and I'm like, oh, who's this guy? Like, and again, it sounds like a fake name, and you're like, oh, Lovecraft. That has to be a pseudonym like Richard Bachman for Stephen King, right?
Yeah, right.
No,
yeah.
And I was like, so slowly but surely, like I would, and another author I was obsessed with, like I was obsessed with Stephen King and Edgar Allan Poe. Those are the two, and like, and so like you read Poe and like this gothic horror and like where he all these little things, and like I was such a nerd. When I think back, like in like 5th grade, I was writing a paper about Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, nice.
And like other kids are like writing about like James Patterson or whatever the hell. I'm like, what the hell is Edgar Allan Poe? I'm like, oh, you don't know. I was the kid watching like black and white horror movies, so like I was different from a lot of the cool kids, I guess you could say. But so throughout all that, and like I would read like Robert E. Howard, and like then I got like into like other authors after Lovecraft, like Bentley Little, and I obsess over like Paperbacks from Hell, like anything.
Oh yes, yep.
Anything that's like, it looks trashy, looks weird, looks disgusting, like I'll buy it. And like I have, and again, kind of like Jim joked, I have probably like a good 60. I'm looking at them right now, 60 or 70 just piled up. Have I cracked any of them open? No, but you know what? The covers are really cool. But
they look good on the shelf.
They look great on the shelf, but like with Lovecraft, I would read like like I had like a few collections. I read a few stories here and there, but I'll be honest, like until like again, Reanimator is probably the first where I saw H.P. Lovecraft's name like on the title. I'm like, oh, that's that author that Stephen King talked about. And then watching From Beyond, and and you start to see things. You start to like go, wait a second, that seems like a character, and then the Cthulhu. Wait, that's a character he talked about, but it's in another movie and it's another story. Okay, and you start to learn all these things, like after he died, all these other authors were writing kind of like the mythos and continuing it, which is, I kind of love that idea, like just continuing it. And then one of like the game, like the Quest for Glory games, one of our episodes, Quest for Glory 4, it
Oh,
basically
yeah.
is like a lot of Lovecraft stuff in that. Like, and you have John Rhys Davies doing the narration, which is already awesome. So little things like that. But like, yeah, like until Jim like kind of brought it up, I'm like, oh, I never actually thought of like doing a podcast about Lovecraft and Lovecraft adjacent movies. And I'm like, oh, this actually works because there are a lot. But like, again, our joke is what makes a Lovecraft or Lovecraftian film. It doesn't always, you have to entitle, tentacles in it, which is always the joke. Like, oh, it has tentacles? Oh, it's Lovecraftian. No, it's not.
True.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely.
That's hentai.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah.
But it is interesting how we take this sort of Lovecraftian world for granted. I was interviewed on a martial arts podcast recently, and the guy said, "Oh, I see you do your own podcast. What's that about?" And I sort of explained it was about Lovecraft and weird fiction. He'd never heard of him, never read anything. So I sent him over something about the shadow over Innsmouth, and oh my God, this stuff's really weird. It's really creepy. So I almost feel quite often when you're immersed in this stuff, you sort of take it for granted that everyone knows about it.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. It's like one of the best bits of developmental editing I've ever had from a publisher was somebody turned around to me and said, "Now, I know what you're talking about, but not everybody has an encyclopedic knowledge of Lovecraft, so you're going to have to explain what the hell you're on about there." I just took it for granted, everybody will know who Nyarlathotep is. It's just,
I know we've spoken about this before, but I think one of the main reasons why Lovecraft continues to be popular and is growing in popularity is the fact that he was so generous with his creations and with his world. Mm-hmm. He actively encouraged other authors not only to write their own things, but also to use his settings. We know there was a lot of exchange went on in the Lovecraft circle.
Yep.
But then I'm also thinking of people like Robert Bloch and Fritz Leiber, who began very much as sort of Lovecraft disciples and then spread out to create their own worlds and their own stories, who are hugely influential.
There you go.
And we've had John Houlihan on a couple of times, and John was very active in the early computer gaming scene in the UK. And one thing he said that always interested me was a lot of those early computer programmers were huge Lovecraft fans, so that influence very quickly spread into the gaming world as well.
He does kind of seem like he's connected, not spiritually, but just in terms of niche interest to something like Dungeons and Dragons, where people were kind of fans of it, like in secret, because they knew that like the larger pop culture was like, this is probably a little bit too weird. No one's into it. And now we're kind of in a period where like those people who discovered it as kids, who are now showrunners and directors and making albums and comic artists, are like, yes, H.P. Lovecraft. And everyone's like, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And here's this, and this kind of a thing. And yeah, I mean, our very first episode of the show was basically just kind of an introduction as to who this guy is, how pervasive it is. And you don't even realize, like, James and I both watched, Batman, the animated series when we were kids, read Batman comics, and like, hey, where does Arkham Asylum come from? Arkham was an H.P. Lovecraft invention. And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great example.
Even, one of my favorite shows and mostly one of my favorite shows and book series is Game of Thrones, and even George R.R. Martin there are very Lovecraftian, blatant Lovecraftian influences in that too, and not to the extent where you're kind of like, where he's jamming it down your throat, but just if you're exploring the world and like, oh, that's an interesting concept, and then you find out where the genesis of that word comes from, and then the genesis of that origin, and it's all, a lot of influences are now like, were influenced by him first, and you don't kind of realize how, even if you don't know who he is, you are kind of aware of the kind of archetypes of his stories and how pervasive they are. I mean, we're constantly kind of amazed by, we'll be reviewing a movie and digging into an interview with the filmmakers, and the filmmakers like, are asked like, oh, this is a very Lovecraftian feel to it. And they're like, yeah, we have no idea who that guy is. But just a lot of the tropes of his stories are so common now that people could potentially be influenced by it or aware of those archetypes without even knowing where they came from to begin with.
Yeah, it's kind of like a sort of second or third hand influence, I suppose. And I don't know that Lovecraft always gets the credit for a lot of the tropes that he invented, because we know he sort of moved away from that traditional Gothic tale or the sort of vampire, the good and evil thing, into this almost, but it's kind of like science fiction, or I guess cosmic horror would be the proper title. And in doing that, he invented a lot of things that we see today.
Oh,
I know there are
definitely.
other people around doing that, but I feel that Lovecraft was the primary influence or the primary inventor for a lot of those tropes.
I guess it's almost like osmosis, because it's like over here in the UK, it's like one of the big influential sci-fi TV shows is obviously going to be Doctor Who. But a lot of the concepts in that come from things like Lovecraft. You know, I mean, there's so many Lovecraftian tropes throughout, like Doctor Who, you know, all the ancient gods and manipulating behind the scenes and all this kind of business. It's all there.
Yeah, like I'm like the guy that loves old, like new and old Doctor Who, and like, you know, I look back, like especially now, like the brain of Morbius is like, oh, this is so Lovecraftian.
Yes.
Like, what the fuck? You know, you don't realize it. You're like, oh my god, like a lot of the Tom Baker stuff would delve into that like weird like horror, you know, and it's amazing.
Yes, very much so. Like Image of the Fendal and stuff like that. And
Yeah. But again, even like stuff like you know, I'm also like I obsess over Red Dwarfs, and even sometimes you know, they'll deal with like stuff like, oh, you know, weird aliens that like to suck the brains out of you, and like
sirens,
the sirens, yes, exactly. So it's like it's so like interesting that like
I thought the despair squid was very Lovecraftian concept.
Yes, no, that's one of my favorites. That's an episode that if someone's never seen Red Dwarf, I go, watch this episode. You'll get who the characters are, but your brain will be like, oh my god, this is really demented, and like how this squid just makes you so depressed that you want to kill yourself. Oh, okay, that sounds Lovecraftian to me.
Exactly. Yeah.
If we move into the actual films then, and I've split them up into 3 categories for us to discuss. The first one is films that are direct adaptations of Lovecraft stories. The second category is films that are very obviously influenced by Lovecraft and may even feature him as a character.
Nice.
And then the third category is films that we might consider Lovecraftian that don't necessarily have a direct Lovecraft connection. And I thought I'd start with that first category. Now, I don't know if I'm correct on this, but would you say that the first direct Lovecraft adaptation was Corman's The Haunted Palace?
Yeah. I was thinking this earlier, and I think so. Yeah, I think so. Either that or Curse of the Crimson Altar.
Yes, I think it's kind of a tie, like almost a tie with those two, because like they came around the same time, like early 60s.
Yeah, so 60s psychedelia.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's kind of weird. Like we covered both of them, and like you know, I like both those films, but like it's, you know, it's almost like they still go for the Poe sensibility, as opposed to, because again, how do you film Lovecraft, like his ideas? So
both of them.
Yeah,
those are the first like 2, but like, you know, we've covered up, you know, the Dunwich Horror, you know, like the original with Dean Stockwell in it, like both. Well, that the 2009 one's one of the worst films we've covered. Boring. It's just so boring. But again, it again is it. And then also The Curse, right? That's another Dunwich Horror.
The Curse,
yeah. But
the Curse was is The Color Out of Space.
Oh, that's true. Is
that the one with Will Wheaton in it?
Will Wheaton,
yeah.
Where he famously declared the best thing that came out of that was he got his sister a job.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a total waste then.
No, but I mean, like, you think about it, like, what, you know, even when we're going back and forth between, like, you know, different times of, like, when we're covering these films, it's like, oh, what's the first, like, you know, good adaptation? What would you say, Jim? Like, was the first, like, okay, we get what Lovecraft is. This is like a straight up adaptation. What would you say was the first one that we covered on the show?
Yeah, because
you're not a fan. You're not the biggest fan of Reanimator. You like the movie, but you don't like it as a.
I don't like it as an adaptation,
which I understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
I get that. I love it, but I get that. Yeah.
I think of Reanimator a bit like I do the first Conan movie, the Arnie one. The first one's great sword and sorcery film, one of the best.
Right.
But it certainly ain't a Conan film.
No. You're right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. The first good one, because I mean, like, The Haunted Palace is a pretty good, effective movie, and James and I kind of even openly wondered on, like, was it by calling it a Poe, like a name that came from Poe, but making an adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft story, was that like subterfuge on the part of Corman to kind of get people in and then show them like, oh, you think you're seeing a Poe thing, but actually here's this guy that like was very influenced by Poe, or was it just the way that he could get funding? As though Roger Corman ever worried about getting funding for a production.
That's true.
Could have just been a studio thing, you know? Studios go, oh, we'll never sell it. Put Poe's name on it instead.
Oh, yeah. We know Poe.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and it's funny. It's the other way around now, right? You just put Lovecraft on everything. So they're like, Lovecraft chainsaw hookers. It's a Lovecraft film. I'm there. I'm watching it.
Yeah, it's sort of it's I mean the curse of having your name in the public domain, where it's like Lovecraft's Cup of Noodles, and it's like, oh, okay, this must be pretty good kind of a thing. But yeah, I don't know. I like The Haunted Palace. It's funny. I know we reviewed Curse of the Crimson Altar. I remember barely anything about it, which I guess speaks to its staying power, maybe.
Now, I really like it, but I think that's mainly through nostalgia, because it's one of them films that I watched as a kid that I'd snuck down in the night to watch on late night, like Channel 4 or BBC2 or some crap at like, you know, when my granddad had gone to bed. So I think it was one of them that I enjoyed it because it's more of a nostalgia thing, but you know.
It felt like something was like, oh, I'm watching something naughty.
Yeah.
Like this is a little dark. There's like there's blood in this, and there's boobs.
Bare butts and things in it, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like as a kid, you know, it's like, ooh, nudity.
But it's funny, the more I think about it, and we didn't, or neither of us really loved it at the time, but I think the first one that really kind of gave you a clue as to what Lovecraft stories were like was probably the Dunwich Horror from 1970 with Dean Stockwell.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I do like that one. Yeah. It is. It is of its time, but I do like it.
You know, and it has problems. It has problems too. Not the least of which is kind of low budget, and also, you know, the one woman has no agency and is basically just there to be raped by an invisible cosmic entity. But also, I mean, but it did utilize its low budget, especially for a story in which the entity is invisible, utilizing POV and just this idea of something outside of kind of this moral grasp and evil cults and that kind of stuff. That was really the first one, because if your first exposure to Poe to Lovecraft was The Haunted Palace, yes, it has Vincent Price, yes, it's the case of Charles Dexter Ward, but it also is still kind of a gothic horror story to a certain extent.
Right.
Yeah. Vincent Price is the evil wizard, right? And there's a curse on the village and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas the Dunwich Horror, you did get this sense of they're up against forces that are totally alien, are totally from outside.
Yeah. Where the threat is not Dean Stockwell. The threat is what Dean Stockwell is trying to usher into our physical existence, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
I'm constantly amazed by how many bad versions of The Lurking Fear there is. To me, that's a film that's written itself. I mean,
the story is quite sort of cinematic and action-packed for Lovecraft.
Yeah, really. It's a very cinematic in a way, but every adaptation that I've seen, I've got, because I collect them, like Lovecraft films, and I've got a stack of them over there, and they're all awful. It's like you got Hemoglobin, which is terrible.
Ooh, I'll push back on Hemoglobin.
Really?
No, I was gonna say. No, I remember, Jim. You and I we liked Hemoglobin. Bleeders, right? That was the other title.
Bleeders,
Bleeders, yeah.
But not because it's like a great adaptation. It's just like, oh, this is better than the other
two, both called The Lurking Fear, which were both dreadful.
My God, it's so bad. But it's true. Like again, it's hard for a lot of filmmakers to adapt Lovecraft because they don't get the cosmic dread, the inevitable like end of your life, you know, like of everything is going to happen. Like in a lot of these stories, like it doesn't matter what you do, you're doomed anyway. Yes. And like they don't get how to film that. They just like, oh, jump scares or here's some like cool special effect, but even then it's not even that good, and you're like, oh, you lost me. Okay, whatever, you know.
Do you think that is down to Lovecraft, though, in terms of he never really wrote character? His stories are all about atmosphere and the sort of the implications more than the actual action sometimes.
Yes.
And I mean, sort of Mackin was the same. We covered the Great God Pan last episode, and there's not a lot that actually directly happens in that. There's not a lot of character development. It's all about the horrible implications of what has gone on. That's difficult to film, I guess.
Right. I mean, I guess when I think of like really good, like at least from our point of view, a really good adaptation of Lovecraft, something like Wan Vu's Color Out of Space, I think gets the idea of dread and like it doesn't matter what you do, you're doomed from the start. Like you feel bad for these people, but it doesn't really matter about the people, even though you do see these horrible things happening to this family and to the land. But it's really about it doesn't matter who it didn't choose. It didn't choose these people. It just happens to be they were there when it fell down to earth.
Yeah,
and it doesn't matter. And you get that from the film where it's just this dread the whole time. And like, and then I remember, Jim and I just being like amazed by this film, like, oh wow, like this gets it, Yeah,
because it's not so much what happens to the people as much as what the people represent for as representatives of humankind in general. Because it's the number one kind of rule for telling or for making a good movie is the show don't tell. Whereas in a novel or short story, you can afford to tell because, especially in Lovecraft's story where they're often being told from a first-person perspective, you can delve into that person's inner machinations and inner thoughts and realize like they'll blatantly telling you, and this is where I went insane because of where my reality was fractured or where I realized that it's, and you can't really do that in a film. If someone's just monologuing for 5 minutes, it's like, this is bad storytelling.
Right.
So it's like, it's a question of how do you visually depict existential dread? Like that's very hard.
That's why I thought one of the most sort of successful ones for me was the HPL Historical Society one, the Call of Cthulhu. They did the silent movie take on it. It's the atmosphere on that. It was so bloody thick. It's stifling. It was brilliant.
Yeah, I think part of the genius of that was having it as a silent movie. I heard Andrew Lehman talking about it. It might have been on your show, actually, where he was saying because it's a silent movie, there's no dialogue, so you're not reliant on the characters for that exposition, which means everything goes into building that atmosphere.
That's what I was thinking.
It is really tough because being such a visual art form, film a lot of times relies on, well, what can we see is happening? And sure, there are creatures in Cthulhu, in Lovecraft stuff, and there are sometimes people getting torn limb from limb, but the viscera is not the point. And a lot of times with filmmakers, it's sort of like that they rely on the viscera to impart some type of emotion, but that doesn't work as well because that kind of makes it just strictly a physical threat instead of a threat to reality. And so that's really difficult. So I find that kind of the most effective Lovecraftian adaptations or filmmakers are the ones that kind of use darkness, space, kind of wide angle lenses just to kind of hint at that fact of like there's this whole abyss and there's just nothing. One of our favorites, which was I guess it could be considered Lovecraftian, even though it has nothing to do with Lovecraft, is the Beach House. Yes. In which it just relies on a lot of shots of people standing in front of the ocean and just this vast expanse in front of them. And that kind of signifies like, yeah, you're just this one little thing in this infinite vastness, which is uncaring about you. Like it was here before you, it will be here after you. So to kind of rely on like, we joke like tentacles or flesh or things being ripped apart. Like, yeah, that's scary, but what's even scarier is just this idea of you being insignificant, and how can you relay that strictly visually? It's a real challenging thing for filmmakers, and a lot of times I think they fail quite spectacularly at trying it.
Yeah.
I thought an interesting take for me was the German version of The Color Out of Space.
Oh, Die Farbe.
That was monochrome, but then they would show the only bits of colour in it were the colour. And I thought that was an interesting way of doing it, because that was really sort of uncanny, sort of weird to watch.
What's interesting is like, Wan Vu, who like, he's a Korean
he's a Vietnamese he's a Vietnamese expat,
expat, and like somehow that all these pieces fell together and like made this, like, to us at least, like this great adaptation. And like, I mean, sadly, the other Color of Space we were fans of until that whole thing. But that's beside the point. You know, we don't like to discuss that. But but you know, like again, like another, you know, in my opinion at least, like the End of the World, the Apocalypse Trilogy by John Carpenter. You know, The Thing, Prince of Darkness, and In the Mouth of Madness. All great in different ways. And like, you know, when we covered each one, they all like almost take different aspects of Lovecraft's ideas and like Carpenter's having fun with these ideas, you know, like, and like the one, you know, like In the Mouth of Madness is just like crazy Sam Neill, like, okay, like the shit that he goes through, and like you have this, you know.
Do you read Sutter Kane? Yeah.
Sutter Kane is like one of the greatest. And like, you know, the ending is so like dark. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter. It's over. The world is over. It's done.
Yeah.
And like Prince of Darkness, like to me, that actually deals with the whole what's beyond the darkness.
That's my favorite of all three.
And you don't ever see it. Right. That's about the same here. I love like that ending shot, you know, like just the hand going and like, oh, you don't know. And like, and of course the Thing is like, you know,
yes,
to me, it's a masterpiece of just horror cinema. And it's amazing that critics hated that film when it came out. And you're like,
it's strange, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is odd that it got that feedback. So I'd have thought on any list of horror films, that's got to be in the top three, surely.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
That's one I could just throw, like, for myself, just not even as a Lovecraftian film, just like one I could just throw on, because it's so bleak. It's like, it doesn't matter what these guys do. And the thing is, like, you know, again, horror films, if you're a horror fan, my biggest pet peeve of horror is like stupid people in horror films.
Let's split up.
And you know, like, let's split up. What's behind this door?
This is why I'm not that keen on slasher movies.
Same.
Why don't you all stick together, pick up that chair and hit him with it?
Right. And I do like it when some films try to like make fun of that. You go, okay, you get it. Like, don't go by yourself. But the Thing, you know, Carpenter gets it where these people aren't dumb. They might make some like mistakes, but it doesn't matter like how smart they are.
Yeah.
They're doomed. Like the moment that dog gets to that base, they're fucked. They're done. They're all dead. It doesn't matter what they do, even though they've quote unquote killed the Thing. Either way, you know, the whole thing of, you know, or did they?
Did they? Because a lot of people, I remember I've read in like critics, some of the thing that critics hated was the ending. I thought the ending was a masterpiece.
Yeah.
That ambiguous ending, you know.
I think it's a masterpiece because it's like, oh, right, is Childs the Thing? Is McCready the Thing? Do they know? Like, do they know?
Yeah.
Would they know? Would they know they actually are the Thing? And ultimately, what if they both aren't the Thing? They're both going to freak out. It doesn't matter.
It's weird that for an entire movie which deals with ambiguity and uncertainty, that it's like you're confused that we're ending with ambiguity and uncertainty.
Yeah, right. I never understood it. It was just like, come on.
Yeah, and surely that ambiguity, that's one of the defining factors of a weird tale, right?
Yep.
Nothing's fully explained because nothing is fully understood or comprehended by the people in the story. So how could it be explained away? And it's like they leave you with this lingering unease.
Yeah.
I think when it's that type of ambiguous ending, it's much more effective.
Yeah.
And then I like the fact that you can go away and discuss this, or you listen to other people discuss it, and you get other ideas come up that make you think and make it even more sort of horrible. It's not like Scooby-Doo where you take the monster's mask off and it's the butler at the end, is it? It's all wrapped up nicely.
Yeah, so it takes the unreliable narrator to a whole new extreme, doesn't it? It's
well, and especially consider. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but especially considering a lot of his stories start with the narrator being very reliable, and then ultimately coming on to something which, but they unravel. Yeah.
So that brings us on to our second category then. So these are films that are not direct Lovecraft adaptations, but certainly set out to be Lovecraftian. And the couple that I mentioned, I think they even have Lovecraft in as a character. So the two that spring to mind for that are Necronomicon and Cast a Deadly Spell. What do we think?
Ah, yes. Yep.
Necronomicon, we intend to cover that at one point. It's where we're handicapped a little bit by how many things we can get our hands on in terms of streaming. So there's as things come into rights and fade out of rights, it's still, so we had to wait for over a year before we could actually watch The Haunted Palace when it was actually available to stream somewhere.
But I mean, other ones that we kind of fell in love with, I know The Empty Man has ideas of Lovecraftian stuff, and our latest episode, The Lighthouse. I mean, I'll keep screaming out to the heavens. Yeah, I think it's a masterpiece of just like, oh man, yeah. I don't want to play it up too much, but it deals with the whole just this. Oh, it doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter. You're doomed from the start. So
I haven't actually seen that. I need to watch that. Yeah.
I believe you covered Cold Skin a little while back as well, which I enjoyed. Yeah. I know it's the same setting. I don't know if it's the same sort of tone of film.
Yeah, we've done that one.
No, it's very, very similar actually in a lot of ways. And another one I know, I remember liking with Black Mountainside.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, we covered that on an earlier episode.
Yeah, that was a good one. Yep,
that was an enjoyable one. Annihilation was amazing. That's a great one. But it's weird that a lot of times I think we've enjoyed more of the Lovecraftian films than the actual outright adaptation because it's just something about when they try to just adapt it from the text, a lot of them just don't get it. We'll get into some of the bad ones.
Like Call Girls of Cthulhu.
One I liked that I know divides people, but I really liked it, but it's really schlocky, so you'll probably like it, was The Void.
Oh, no, love that one, yeah.
Void is so enjoyable.
Yeah. I really enjoyed that. I know a lot of people who don't. Yeah.
Yes. I enjoyed that as well, yeah. And I like the fact they use old school real-time effects rather than a lot of CGI.
Yes. Yeah, same. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the same guys from Astron 6 from Canada, and they just do they did Manborg and weird, they do the schlocky, trashy films. And The Void was one that I was so hyped for when I would just see the teaser posters for it. I'm like, okay, what is this? Yeah,
I just saw the DVD case on Amazon and bought it.
Actually, what's funny is it's a weird side note, but before the American Blu-ray was coming out, I actually bought the UK Blu-ray because I'm like, oh, this came out first and it's cheaper. Okay. For some reason, it was cheaper to ship it from the UK than to buy the American Blu-ray.
Oh, that's mad.
Right? What? Okay, I'll buy it, and it works perfectly. I have a multi-region Blu-ray player because I need every film ever. But The Void is so good. The Void is I can't wait. But what sucks is those guys they did, like you said, they did all the special effects in-house, right there. But it's hard to get money for those films.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're rather oh, can you do it for cheaper? Well, if you do it for cheaper, it's all CGI. Can you do that?
It looks crap.
Yeah. Well, again, look at one the Thing remake, or not the remake, the whatever.
Yeah, the Deceit thing, prequel.
Yeah, it's supposed to be the other base. Yeah.
Yeah, the other people. But what's sad about it is that they did all the effects practically, and then the producers want oh no, just put CGI over them.
Yeah.
What? Because and then what really makes me sad was in the early mid 2000s, the Sci-Fi Channel had commissioned a Thing like miniseries.
Oh.
And if you look up Thing miniseries.
Oh,
sci-fi,
I thought I heard about that. Was it around the time they did the video game?
around the same time, and like they would have actually, one of the coolest things, and I don't want to say it here, but look it up. They actually, I forgot who wrote it, but they actually deal with how would the Thing get away with the blood sample test. It actually figures out how to screw with the blood sample test. Like, nice. Now I know how to get around it. So like, but it just costs too much. And like at that time, the Sci-Fi Channel, I think they had just made the I think they did one of the Dune.
Oh yeah, Dune miniseries.
Miniseries like Children of Dune or whatever. So, and it didn't do well. So they're like, we'll pass on that. But you can see like a lot of the cool drawings that they had, the concept art, and it's like, oh man, like, and it was actually going to be like in a small town.
Oh, that sounds cool.
So it could like get around like easier. Like it wasn't just like it, but not a big city, but so it's scarier. Yeah, but like again, one of these things that'll never get made, and you go, oh, okay, god damn it.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. I'm gonna have to look into that. That sounds great. Yeah, because I thought that video game they made, that was a much better story than the one that they eventually made into a plot.
Yeah, it was. And again, I think that, and then I don't know if you guys remember the Dark Horse, they did the sequels for the comic books.
Yes,
and like the first one's all right, but then it gets into like the Thing wants to have like a sexual relationship with a woman. And I'm like, okay,
really?
What are you like? Now you're just doing fanfic here, like erotica. Like, okay.
Sounds like we're getting into Alan Moore territory there.
Yeah. Hentai, yeah.
And just even the small town thing with James talked about, I think that's the thing that makes The Void so effective, is that it takes place in a small isolated location, but but the ramifications or the implications of what is happening there, you can easily expand them to an existential, to a larger level of like, what is happening here is eventually going to happen on the rest of it. And I mean, everywhere. Talk about ambiguous endings, that final shot of just like, what the fuck are they looking at right now? And just kind of hints at like, this is not the end. And that's even kind of so disheartening. James is very famous on our podcast for saying he loves a bleak ending. If there's a happy ending, he is not interested.
I don't do happy endings. I can't do twee. I don't do twee.
So the fact that in that universe and in Lovecraft's universe, the only victories you can really have are small personal ones, because in the end, what's coming is going to come. So the fact that like this couple goes through all this stuff, and then at the end it's still just like, and whatever's coming is coming, and that's kind of it. And it's sort of like,
doesn't matter.
The most you can hope for is a short delay before the inevitable doom.
Yeah,
and it balances the visceral well, because there clearly are these practical creatures, but the way that they shoot and cut it together is you never really get a clear shot of what you're looking at. It is in a way undescribable and unnameable,
right?
Unlike the film The Unnameable, where you can very much name that thing.
The unnameable.
Oh, look, it's a person in a mask.
It is a person in a mask.
Yeah, it's like a witch. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
that's
all right.
Kind of scary, I guess, but not really.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move into category number 3, which is films we might consider Lovecraftian that have no direct reference to Lovecraft.
Okay, yeah.
We've spoken about The Thing already, which I guess would be one of the top ones. I'd also like to put forward Alien, and I'd also like to throw up for discussion the original Evil Dead, because that's got the Necronomicon in it, right? So it must be Lovecraftian. Discuss.
But the ending of it, I think, is very Lovecraftian. You know, when you got that, when the big void thing opens up, and
even Evil Dead 2, when like, it's just this big, like, you don't even know what the hell it is. Just something coming to like devour them, and you're like, oh, okay, what?
Yeah, I think I love that tracking shot through the woods.
Amazing.
That is incredibly Lovecraftian, because it's never revealed what it is. All you see is people turning around and going, oh.
Right, you never see what the force is. But they're always horrified by it. So you could put up again. I could see Sam Raimi, being a Lovecraft fan. I can, that's.
Well, you get that through a lot of his stuff. I mean, things like like Bubba Hotep and all that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I think it would. I would probably say. So I guess we unofficially kind of have 3 categories, or maybe even 4 categories. We kind of got adaptations. There's kind of Lovecraftian, spiritually influenced, if you want to call it that, or there's sort of like Lovecraft adjacent, where there's stuff in it, but could I call it Lovecraftian? No, and that's probably where I'd put Evil Dead, because he does clearly draw influences from that. But in terms of its spirituality and its themes, they don't really they don't really hit upon themes that are common in Lovecraft stories, such as like your inescapable fate, your cosmic insignificance, that kind of a thing. Like, in Evil Dead, Ash saves the day and is a hero, and there's that kind of thing. And then you have a 4th weird category, which are Lovecraft adaptations, which are in no way Lovecraftian, that's kind of the bottom of the barrel, the garbage, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. But the ones that I guess what comes to mind for me is maybe Resolution by Benson and Moorhead, which is sort of one that has some Lovecraftian vibes, at least in the sense of there is some type of entity out there that is not really discussed, not really named, not even really seen, that sort of has an influence on the physical and existential reality of a group of kind of like a cult group. But even in interviews, Benson and Moorhead have been open, like, yeah, we had no idea who this Lovecraft guy was. People just kept asking us about it, and it's like, we didn't know who he was. Like, and so once again, gets back to that idea of the pervasiveness of his influence, but also, is not one where like Lovecraft fans could watch and be like, oh, I really appreciate this because of XYZ, and people who have no idea who Lovecraft is can be like, oh, well, I appreciate because of ABC. So there are entirely different things, but that's kind of one that occurs to me. Resolution. If you haven't seen it, it's sort of a sequel to unofficial kind of sequel to a previous movie they did called The Endless, which is it's kind of, The Endless is like an intimate story about 2 guys stuck in this loop basically, and then Resolution.
Yes, I know it. It's on my that's on my to watch list. I've just not got around to watching it.
So those are the kind of there, but and only kind of Lovecraft adjacent, because there's some hints of it, that kind of stuff, but but they are also movies that kind of hint towards an emotional development or a something which would not be seen in a Lovecraft story, and just also the filmmakers themselves are like, no idea who this guy is. But if that if it makes you appreciate it more, then cool, by all means.
Right. Well, would you say Starfish also? Starfish is also like, because when we had White on.
Yeah, we spoke to Al White about that, and he was like, "Yeah, no, didn't intend for any Lovecraftian stuff, but hey, cool."
That's interesting.
Nice.
I wonder if it's a reflection of the times as well.
Yes.
I mean, we had the sort of Cold War, the 50s, and then I grew up with it in the sort of late 70s and early 80s. There was a resurgence in the Cold War, and everything seemed to calm down for a while, and everything's going fine. And now we're into this era of pandemic and extreme climate change,
civil unrest, and just madness.
People have this feeling again, perhaps, of being there's no control. All our systems are revealed as very fragile. There's larger forces at work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, and I wonder how much of what is going on around us has kind of kicked that back up in people, of just this idea of like, I thought I knew, kind of how humanity worked and kind of how we're moving forward. Then the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden it's like, what is this? I'm surrounded by madness here. I'm the worldview that I had is no longer applicable, and I can't reconcile. Like, okay, no, this is logic. And then this is where people are, and it's just and just that idea of like, we're looking for something, a government entity, a giant bearded man coming down from a cloud to kind of be like, hey, don't worry, this is how things are going to play out, and there's nothing, and we kind of have to just, our philosophies, our worldviews have all been very much challenged in the last 1.5, 2 years, and we're struggling to reconcile that, because it's just like, wait, is it all gone? Is all hope gone? Like, I thought I believed in something.
It's like we've all had the security blanket pulled away, haven't we? It's just,
That's true.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people suddenly waking up to the fragile reality of the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's something that in our relatively privileged lifestyles in the parts of the world that we live in, we've been very insulated from. Yeah. That's suddenly coming home to roost.
Right.
And 2 other tangents off of that point is with the way things are or have been lately, how on earth do you deal with that as a satirist? Because how can you make some of this stuff madder than it already is?
No, yeah.
And then also something else we've spoken about before quite often on the show, which always interests me, is where is that line between enjoying horror as entertainment, which we all do in its various forms, and balancing that with the real-world horror that's going on around us? Which I guess has always been the case throughout history, if we go back to the grim fairy tales, right, which were really grim.
Oh, God, no.
No, not at all.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a question there, but I'm certainly going to respond to it, just at least in the sense of, I know for me, I've loved horror since I was a kid. I was born and raised in an evangelical environment. When I was a kid, the Bible stories I always was most interested in was the Book of Revelation, the stuff that involved the angels and demons, and didn't really care about the development of the tribes of Judah or Israel, that kind of stuff. And so I've always been fascinated by this. I am still to this day a devout practicing Christian, though I want to preface it to the viewers that I'm the liberal kind that other Christians believe is going to hell because of what I.
Oh yeah, I get that totally. I mean, I've been told the same thing for enjoying Tolkien.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even though he was a devout Catholic.
Yeah, right. And I guess that's why. So like I love horror because of what it speaks to when it comes to morality and what's inherent in human beings. But what I find the most horrifying about Lovecraft and those kind of things are just as that idea of like your narratives and your philosophies and your worldviews are wrong. Not only is there nothing out there, your physical existence is a joke.
Right.
It's not even that it's a mistake.
Yeah.
It's that it's
Yeah.
Yep. It's that it's a joke, and these things that have existed long before you will exist long after you, and you have no significance to physical creation or existential creation because there's nothing else out there. That flies in the face of everything you're told about every major religion, in the sense of there's a plan or there's a purpose or there is something bigger that you are working towards. And to just have the final answer be nothing, or you have no agency, you have no say, is really a horrifying concept. And so that's and it's not the kind of stuff that you can see on a screen all of a sudden, like, oh my god, something jumped out and I'm startled. It's more you sit there and just kind of like, fuck man, like what is there? Like what's the point of anything?
It's like Thomas Ligotti is the one for me who gets me with that. He's the only person I can read their stories and enjoy them, but come away depressed.
Yeah.
It's just so bleak.
Yeah.
It's just like, you're nothing. Nothing you do is worth a shit. It's just like,
it's just to have that idea that on an individual level, when it's something like not even Charles Dexter Ward, but just like some stories where it's like on a surface level, one, you thought you were doing something because you chose to, and really that was in your bloodline and that was your imminent fate. You were always going to get to that point.
Right, yeah.
That's horrifying. But then also like, and on a larger level, when you're dead, that's it. Fuck you, bye. Like there's nothing.
Yeah, it's like nothing of you exists or endures beyond that little sort of spark of light that briefly flares up and then it's gone forever.
Yeah, there's no heaven. There's not even hell. There's no heaven or hell. You don't exist anymore.
Yeah. And now, like, I've been able to kind of make peace with not even Lovecraft stories, but just as a philosophical concept, because, like, well, if there is nothing, that just kind of means that we have to do what we can to take care of ourselves and take care of our creation while we are here, because there is nothing else. That makes it more special.
Yeah.
But in Lovecraft stories, and his protagonists are just like, hey, I'm going to jump out of the window after I'm done writing this because there's what's the point in going on?
Right.
And that really is like, to fly in the face of everything you've been told of, like, there's a purpose, there's a plan, there is going to be, the question of why, there's an answer for it. Where in this one, it's like, no, there is none. Like, why?
Yes.
That's it. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think if we look at it historically, I mean, Lovecraft was living and writing in the dawn of the atomic age, which was this idea of forces beyond our comprehension almost being unleashed.
Yes. Yeah.
And also at that time, we had the growth of surrealism, existentialism. There was very much that idea of being the outsider, perhaps,
right.
Which Colin Wilson wrote a lot about later on. Again, someone else who was very influenced by Lovecraft.
Sure.
And I wonder how much of that grew out of the experiences of World War One, particularly in Europe, where it had a devastating effect, not just from a point of view of casualties and millions of people being killed, but the way it altered the social structures, perhaps, of the time as well. It made people question all those old certainties.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I feel there's a whole other discussion we could have there, but perhaps we better get back to the films. So we've spoken about Lovecraft adaptations, we've spoken about Lovecraftian films.
Yeah.
Let's talk about something we briefly mentioned before, and that is some of the worst films. Let's scrape the bottom of the barrel, let's empty out the trash can and see what's lurking.
Right. Well, I have one in capital letters by a filmmaker that I actually do enjoy, which is, you know which one I'm talking about, Cool Air by Albert Pyun.
Because I was gonna mention Chill. Is that the same one or that a different one?
It's funny, we did both in a row. Like, Chill appears to be the worst one.
Yeah, I thought it was awful. That's what I was going to mention. Yeah.
Yeah, but we actually enjoyed Chill a little bit more than Cool Air, because Cool Air, I do not remember. I remember it being bad, but I don't remember anything about it. Like, it just came and it hurt us so bad.
Oh, sure. Yep.
We talked about it, and I remember we wanted to scream to the heavens, like, please get this out of us. Like, we need to and then I don't remember anything about it since. Do you, Jim?
Cool Air, I do remember that Cool Air has a protagonist who, I believe the protagonist is a screenwriter, so all of a sudden you have a meta level, which, like, I'm already prepared to hate you because you're going to try something meta with this. Now
you're making me remember, because that's the one with the girl with the special girl.
Yeah, there is, and the character openly laments that a woman has autism because otherwise he would be sexually into her.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Oh, here we go.
So it fails. It fails on a level of one. It's tasteless. So it's like, but also its characters are. The main character is a jackass and an irredeemable one, so it's like, what am I emotionally invested in here? Like, I don't care what happens to you now. Like, I hope you die in a brutal manner. And it also, it just kind of, it doesn't really, it fails on the level, like, I mean, I love Cool Air because it just is that thing, like, basically the theme of Cool Air is like, we're just bags of meat kind of a thing.
Yeah. Simple.
And that one is really the kind of story that I think you sort of need. You need some type of a budget, because just to kind of see the upstairs scientist and like his mechanics and how he is keeping himself alive. Like there's an imagination there. Like there's something that could be cool and steampunk about it, and it's really a movie that suffers from a just tremendously low budget, because instead we kind of have to just spend a lot of time with our protagonist, who is an unrepentant asshole.
Right.
Until he dies, and then it's like, okay, good.
Yeah.
But he doesn't die, right? The main character, he like drunks off.
Oh yeah, okay.
Right?
No, he becomes.
Now he's writing a new TV show, and you're like, oh, you didn't even
die.
Oh,
that's right.
Remember, he's lamenting.
Well, so you don't even get the satisfaction of him dying then?
No, he's just driving off in his beautiful car. You're like, oh, so you're a piece of shit, and you go on. This is this is not like you did not get it at all, and like it makes me so sad, because I really like Albert Pyun's films, like, Cyborg, with Jean-Claude Van Damme. I'm a fan of that. Even
it's a great film. It's awful, but it's great.
It's fun. It's so much fun. Yeah, exactly. Radioactive Dreams, which is like this weird like post-apocalyptic noir film he made. It's like he was a filmmaker that. He had a low budget when he was early on, and he would figure out ways to make the most of it. But when it came down to Cool Air, he had a low budget and just went, fuck it, whatever. Set the camera up, let me walk away. Action. And but like now I'm remembering it. Now it's actually making me really depressed right now.
Right. Let's not talk any more about that then. So let's wrap things up, and I hope our listeners have got some ideas for films to check out that you may have not seen before, or perhaps films to avoid maybe as well.
Yes.
And I think the Arkham bus is going to be turning up very shortly, but we do have time for one more feature before we go, and that's our new mail-in segment of the show, Dagon's Sack. Dagon's Sack. Tim, would you care to do the honours and grab hold of Dagon's Sack for us?
Oh, I will. Just let me grab a hold of it, Here we go, sir.
Thank you, sir. Oh, Let me just wipe whatever this is off the envelope.
Yeah. Dagon's Sack's a bit sweaty today.
Okay. And it's a question from Duncan in Edinburgh. Thank you, Duncan. And it's a very appropriate one for today's theme. Duncan writes, if you had a big lottery win and budget was not an issue, which Lovecraft story would you like to adapt for film? And who would you cast in it? So, there we go. Who wants to go first on that one?
Well, I mean, I still want a super big budget at the Mountains of Madness, which is one we live in a world where Guillermo del Toro was going to make it with James Cameron producing it, and it did not get made.
Yep.
So that's kind of the one I'd want. Casting wise, man, you try to think what actors would you want? I don't know, that's hard. Jim, do you have any suggestions for actors or actresses that just would feel at home in a Lovecraft or Lovecraftian film?
I'm not sure about casting. I'll be honest, my brain went somewhere else because a few years ago, I remember before Barbara Crampton essentially tried to kickstart a Lovecraft cinematic universe. I had ideas for a Lovecraft cinematic universe, and here's the stories I'd want to see, and here's the directors I'd want to bring them to life. So not casting so much as which director would I like to see. And for me, I actually would love to see an adaptation of The Shadow over Innsmouth, which I know that we have in Dagon, and it's bad.
No, I love that.
I like it more than Jim, so I'll say that.
I love it. That's one of my favorites. I love that.
Everyone likes that one except for me. But I want to see The Shadow over Innsmouth, and I want to see it directed by Ramin Barani, who is a guy behind Man Push Cart, 99 Homes, Chop Shop, who is a guy that a lot of his early filmmaking work, actually most of his filmmaking work, with the exception of the unfortunate Fahrenheit 451 adaptation that he did, really deals with class division and this idea of how people have to adapt to an oppressive kind of economic system. So, for instance, Man Push Cart is all about, I believe, an Iranian or a Middle Eastern person who is, I think, a doctor in his hometown and comes to America and basically just has to push a halal cart, and that's what he does because he can't find work doing anything else. And to have a film like Shadow over Innsmouth, in which at the core of it is a port city or town that at one point was an economic thriving location and has now been so broken down that the city has gotten to the fact of we have to mate with these fish people for our line to continue. There's something in there that speaks to basically the oppressive nature of capitalism and what happens when the money falls out and what is the existence of your town now relying upon. So that's a director who I'd like to see kind of step up and make a horror film. And plus his films are always kind of shot with a realistic sort of realistic eye. So I think that could be an interesting approach to a story which is fantastical, but also grounded very much in a character's exploration of his family, his home, where he came from, that kind of a thing. And I'd like to see, maybe Riz Ahmed as the lead, just because there's also undertones in that of just kind of racial purity and how corrupting that is, kind of a thing. So that's my impulse.
That's a very interesting approach. Some things there I've not thought of before. I did enjoy Dagon, but I viewed it more as almost like a Call of Cthulhu scenario movie, a sort of, a Lovecraft action movie. And it did some things really well, but I don't think it touched on those themes you mentioned there. So that kind of approach would be very interesting to see in a film. Those racial or genetic issues, the fitting in, and also that idea you mentioned of what do people do to survive in times of economic difficulty. Yeah, so that'd be a very interesting approach. Yeah. Tim, what do you think? What would you pick?
Yeah, now you see, now you see, Jim has a very sort of highbrow and very interesting take on it. Now I'd like to see a version of Shadow over Innsmouth made by Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright. Yeah, and I'd want to see Brian Blessed as Zadok Allen.
Oh, that'd be good.
That'd be a lot of fun.
There you go.
Oh, Brian Blessed. Oh. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, just him like screaming around like this.
Simon Pegg as Mr. Olmsted, you know, and you could have Edgar Wright as as Sergeant, the bus driver. You know, there you go.
Well, and you know what? That was my, because I mean, if you have Simon Pegg and Nick Frost's character, you know what kind of movie it's going to be. So I'm on board with that. And my problem with Dagon was that like it started out like this is going to be a serious movie, but then there's these weird.
Oh yeah, we said Harold Lloyd.
Yeah, there's the fact that your lead actor is purposely imitating silent film comedy star Harold Lloyd, like that's wildly out of place in this movie. So I don't know what you're doing here, and it kind of undercuts the seriousness because instead it's got a horde of fishmen trying to break into a door, and your character being like, "Who is it?" Like you fucking know who it is. It's people trying to break in and kill you.
Might just be room service. Well, I hear the Arkham bus pulling up outside. That signals an end to today's tour, and well, it's starting to get a bit dark anyway, and no one wants to hang around after dark in Innsmouth. So we'd like to say a big thank you again to our two guests today, Jim Rohner and James McCormack from the Cast of Cthulhu. Thanks very much, guys. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And of course, we'll put a link up to the podcast in the show notes below. Do go and check it out. It really is an excellent podcast. Please do let us know some of your favourite Lovecraftian films, or which film you'd like to make given an endless budget. As always, you can post up on our Patreon page, or you can put a message on our Facebook group.
Yeah, and you can also email in to dagonsack.
Yeah, do please send your questions in, because I think Tim actually likes putting his hands in Dagon's sack.
I do, yeah. Something about going and collecting it from the post office that's really quite satisfying.
And that's at dagonsack@outlook.com. Yes, even the elder gods have their own emails now. They do like to move with the times.
Yeah.
And just enough time to remind you about the new Innsmouth Gold anthology Corridors, which has its Kickstarter going for another 2 weeks or so. That's a post-apocalyptic setting, and it's all based around the mythology of the King in Yellow. So at the time of recording, we're almost up to the target. So a big thank you to everyone who's pledged so far. And we just need a few more people in to put that project into production.
Yep.
As always, thanks to all the Patreons who support the show. If you'd like to join them and help to spread our tentacles, then check our Patreon site for details. Remember, as a patron, you get access to bonus content, and you also get a monthly copy of Innsmouth News. Next time is going to be a Christmas special, and as is traditional at this time of year, we're going to be looking at M.R. James, and we're going to be reading Canon Alberich's scrapbook. From there, we're going to take a quick stroll across to the Gilman House, where we're going to have a chat to our special guest, Robert Lloyd Parry, who, under the heading of Nunky Theatre Productions, travels the country giving excellent performances of M.R. James stories. So we're really looking forward to that one. Big thanks again to Jim and James, and that's it from us. It's goodbye from me, Rob Poyton.
And it's goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.